Okay, ladies and gentlemen, if we could take our seats, we'll get started. Okay, good afternoon. We've got one more to go, and it's a good one. So I'm really glad to see the room full up, and for many of you to have taken the time to stay to the very end. We think it's going to be worth your while. Again, I have to repeat myself, but we do have evaluation forms that are out on your desk. We are going to collect those towards the end of the session. There will be a prize draw, some biscuits or cookies, rather, not the kind you put gravy on. Sorry. We really do take your feedback very seriously. It feeds into where we locate the conference, the content that we do. Feel free to, vote on whether Louis or I is a better moderator, should be clear, the answer. Some of you have even, in recent conferences been telling me to shave my beard. That's one point I actually haven't listened to, but if enough of you put it forward, I'll consider it. So yeah, we will. And also put your name on the evaluation form because we do a prize draw and obviously we like to see who did it. However, there is an option to be anonymous, so we won't publish that information if you don't want it to be. Right, so we've brought together here a panel of car makers, some leadership, some top leaders from major logistics providers here in North America, and it is the opportunity for you to ask questions. Obviously, we have such a big panel here that it requires two moderators to corral them and maybe try and tackle them if either tries to escape, any of them try to escape a difficult question by running off stage. So it'll be Louis and I on either side to hold them in there. But we do hope and that we'll have a lot of engagement from your side as well. Maybe just a little sum up of what we've kind of been talking about the last couple of days. Obviously, you all read headlines and you know as well as us that the global market is a bit mixed right now, but North America is certainly a very positive story and remains one. I mean, we do conferences around the world, so we can tell you about some of the problems we're seeing in China, in Brazil, in Russia, and places like this. Even Europe, which has recovery, but is certainly it's maybe rather fragile, to put it lightly. But in North America, the outlook is still positive. We're going back towards 17 million. We have in the U.S., we're looking at maybe 20 million units of light vehicle production by the end of the decade. Should be able to sustain any kind of cyclical downturns if we believe the forecasts and things like that. So it's a positive picture, and one that's obviously encouraging for logistics. The event kind of proves itself to show that we're seeing investment in new services, in capacity, in IT, and all kinds of areas. So again, it is a positive story, and one that we've been glad to share in over the last 2 days. But obviously, if you've been paying attention and you saw our theme, which is connected and coming soon, we've been spending quite a bit of time talking about a future which might be quite different, whether it's in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, who knows? But one in which automation to a level that we have not yet seen, or connected vehicles, or smart factories could really start, driverless cars and trucks could really start to transform our economy and this industry in a way that might be quite devastating, depending on how you see it. It's not quite the reality we're living now, but it's certainly one where we think it's right to think about and to sort of, certainly in a context of a conference like this, to be a bit provocative and at least think out loud about what it can mean. One of our panelists in a prior session talked about in revolutions, it's normal to have some violence, right? So will there be blood in automotive logistics as well? On the other hand, I mean, this is an industry that kind of prides itself maybe on being more evolutionary than revolutionary. I mean, it's not one in which change happens overnight, and it's one in which, if you were to ask, and I probably will ask, if one of our panelists would rather a driverless truck tomorrow, or more rail capacity out of Mexico, or a ro-ro port a terminal in Veracruz, or a truck capacity out of West Coast ports, maybe they'd be looking for the physical capacity rather than that technology now. So it's sort of, we're kind of caught between conflicting sides almost in a way. Some of it, I'm sure, is hype, but again, we know the technology is there. So I kind of want to just start our panel off with this question. So this connected future we're talking about, is it hype for automotive logistics or is it reality? And if it's reality, what are you starting to see? What do you anticipate in your supply chain, whether it's a logistics provider or a car maker, that you're going to start seeing in your company? So, I mean, anyone who, maybe we'll start with Marc, since it's an easy question, and I'm sure you can answer it for everyone right away.
Yeah, I'm not sure a connected car is going to have a huge impact at the supply chain level for the things that we do, both parts and materials inbound and vehicles outbound. My anecdote is I just spent the last 10 years driving a 2004 Grand Cherokee, and just recently got into a 2015 Grand Cherokee, and I was amazed at the application of technology, you know, and certainly around the adaptive car, the adaptive cruise control, going in and out of lanes, the warnings that we have, things that, you know, I've driven for 20 years, 30 years without considering, and that technology took a lot to get used to. You know, so as a driver, I think there's a lot of things that are going to change. But you know, from a tactical supply chain, I think we're going to be doing the same things that we're doing for the near future, certainly. So.
Pass. No. Okay. Yeah, I think clearly there will be a change in the market. Connected car, autonomous driving, name them all. There will be significant changes in the automotive industry, and for me, the key, and in particular, the customer demand will change significantly. I think customers will expect much more flexibility from us as we've seen it before, because they're used to it. It's what I always call the Amazon experience. I think you can buy what you want, you can configure it in whichever shape or form you want, and surprise, surprise, it turns up the next morning at 10 o'clock at your door. And I strongly believe the same will happen in the automotive industry, which obviously puts challenges into the logistics part of the world, into the planning of supply chains. And the question probably we need to ask ourselves is, what is the equivalent in our industry? Where is the next level of innovation happening in this industry that matches this demand? If you go back in time, and it's probably true for most of us, I think the base principles of logistics in automotive have not changed for the last 10, 15 years. And the question is really, can we keep pace with what's happening around us? And I'm strongly convinced there will be people out there that find solutions, and these will be the winners. And I just had a discussion with some of you just ahead of the meeting. Just think about the world of mobile phones and go back, let's say 15 years. There was a company called Nokia. Some of you might remember them. There was a world-leading company in mobile telephones at a certain point in time. Well, this company does no longer exist. And why? Because they didn't keep pace with smartphones. So what is the smartphone equivalent in our world? What is the revolutionary thing that will happen? And I'm convinced there will be smart people out there that will develop it.
Well, I think it's kind of unfair, because as you go around the room, you're going to start hearing the same stories, right? Same answers. But I tend to agree that you probably will not see a lot of changes in supply chain based on technologies and car and everything. As a consumer, of course, it'll be fantastic. It'll be probably better for us to have conference calls in the car than back in the office, right? But in reality, it's just, I don't think it'll be a big change in the supply chain. However, I have to say two elements here. We have to make sure that we deliver the parts at the right time, we'll deliver the vehicles at the right time. And I think our consumer base is going to become a lot more I guess, selective on what they do. They're going to change a lot more. There were some statistic out there that probably the way a buyer is going to buy in the future automobiles is not necessarily going to be through dealers. Probably it's going to go probably more online. So you're going to start looking at how do you change your supply chain to kind of emulate a little bit more of the other industries. Like, for example, what's Amazon doing to help on the e-channel, right? Or Walmart or any other retail for that matter. So I think probably since our channels will change a little bit, that may change our distribution requirements, and that may change as well how we react to changes in demand. And therefore, we will need very flexible suppliers, will be very flexible times of response and whatnot, and very good infrastructure. So, so I think it will, but not probably at the extent that we may think about.
Yeah, so the good thing about being down the line, I can keep my comments very short, because I mirror a lot of things that you've just mentioned. You know, we talk about the connected car, but really we should be talking about the connected consumer, because that dynamic is going to change very drastically. The flexibility, as you mentioned, is going to become a big key, and keeping up is going to be the real challenge for us.
So it's kind of interesting. I think there is someone starting to disrupt, and I guess the question is, how disruptive will that become? So Tesla. So I have one. It's a phone, and they describe it to you as a user as a phone. And I put it in my garage at night, and it uploads the software. And the car they sell in 3 weeks has different features than the car they sold last week. And so I think the supply chain in automotive is very scheduled. It's very fixed, especially inbound to the factory. It's very planned. And if you talk about flexibility, I think that's what changes. So Tesla is vertically integrated, whether you agree with their propulsion model and electric or not. They have a very vertically integrated supply chain around the driver experience, and they don't really have model years per se. I don't know how that scales, but I think it's disruptive, and as an owner, it's a real change. So I think that will challenge the traditional models, and they're obviously quite small, and we do a lot of work with the people here on stage at looking at how you create a more responsive supply chain without model year changeovers and things like that. So to me, that's what I look at and say, is that model something that will evolve, or will Tesla evolve into, or others like that evolve into the model year or more fixed planning model? Don't know the answer. I think it's very interesting, though.
So Tesla is doing some very innovative stuff, some disruptive stuff. It's very visible. They're public. Elon Musk is always talking about everything they're doing. What I'm really interested in is, what is Google doing? Because I don't know exactly what Google is doing. But I think they're doing something that's potentially very, very disruptive just by smelling it. I'm not quite sure what it is. But if we want to look for what could be a threat, as Matthias was saying, I would look to Google. And in terms of the connectivity, and I think we all clearly agree autonomous vehicles are coming. The question I have in my mind is, what are we going to do in the cars? What kind of education, what kind of entertainment, what kind of social activities, what kind of communication, what kind of holograms? It could be a very interesting opportunity and a big market.
Cars still need to be built. You know, regardless of who disrupts, cars still need to be built. Cars still need to be delivered. You know, we've heard about Amazon quite a number of times over the last 2 weeks, and we've certainly heard about Amazon if you've been in supply chain for a while. Yeah, but I would argue that the work that everyone in this room does, particularly on the parts and materials side, delivering specific parts and materials or pieces to line side in 15-minute windows that were basically ordered on a purchase order within the last 24 hours. I mean, you guys have invented the model that Amazon is just pushing out to the retailer, right? So when you think about innovation, you think about what Amazon's doing. I spent the last 5 years in consulting, and I would argue that automotive, you know, is doing what Amazon is doing on the parts and materials side, you know, as the innovation towards the line side logistics and how we build vehicles, how we assemble vehicles, how we connect suppliers to the plants and suppliers and integrated logistics centers and logistics third parties to the process of getting those products in the specific windows based on what our expectations are as manufacturers. I think where you'll see the challenge is on the finished vehicle side. And you talked about the expectations of the client and the customer. You know, I think that's where there's going to be challenges moving forward, is that now that the consumer is used to the immediacy of ordering something and having it tomorrow, from an infrastructure standpoint and from a process standpoint, we need to find ways on the finished vehicle side to innovate, or at least to get as close as we can to the expectations that they may have on how those vehicles should be delivered in a quality manner, that are properly prepared, that have the proper, you know, training and, you know, user experience as we move more towards, you know, the Teslas of the world and the automated cars. You know, so I think that's the challenge. But, you know, when we talk about Amazon, we talk about the things that they do for the retailer. I think on the parts and materials side, certainly as we service plants and we get more efficient at doing that, I think we're pretty innovative.
But when we look at comparing ourselves to other industries, the other one that we often use is Apple. Well, how would you like, Mark, particularly on the vehicle logistics side, to have 4 products that you ship out, and the only difference is there's 3 colors, things like that? Maybe vehicle logistics would be a lot easier if it was less complex. I think we sometimes compare ourselves badly against other industries and how fantastic Apple are as an example. But if you had 4 colors to choose from, 3 basic models, I think vehicle logistics would be a lot easier for you as well.
Would it? We've got 3 categories of vehicles. We've got small vehicles, mid-sized vehicles, and large vehicles. There's conveyances that are established to move those. So I'm not sure that the complexity in choice drives complexity in operations in the finished vehicle side. But I mean, yeah, I mean, if you reduced it down to 3 choices, we probably could get more efficient as an industry. So, but yeah.
But we've talked and accepted that there will be huge change. Where are you looking for? We've discussed where the challenges might be, but as an organization, from your side, from looking at supply chain or, you know, or vehicle logistics, or as a CEO of an LSP, where are you looking to try and anticipate change? You say, for example, you're looking at Google, but, you know, you can't, how can you change your organization from now based on the Google card when we've got no idea where it is or what it is or whatever? So where are you looking, and what can you do to anticipate change in your organization to prepare for the huge changes that we're expecting? Well, maybe I'll start with Dana on that one, because I don't want you to have to give a short answer.
Yes. Well, really, it's a lot of that. From a supply chain perspective, a lot of what we're doing is to build flexibility, not to be flexible to anything and everything, but to what we can anticipate. So trying to build in the flexibility, my team will tell you that we have this conversation over and over and over again. The flexibility that you build into the supply chain, we want to be able to say, when somebody comes and says, oh my gosh, we've got this huge change we want to undertake, you want to be the one sitting at the table saying, okay. So it's really a lot of building in flexibility in your solutions, in your capacity, in your approach, in your ability to re-engineer the networks, to be completely flexible, to an extent.
Yeah, I think we heard the example of Tesla, and Tesla is probably a good example. First of all, they've got only 1 car, that helps. They've got only 1 color, that helps as well. They've got a little bit more, but just think about what they've done, I think. They don't ship, they ship only 1 vehicle, but they customize it actually in your garage. Well, that's how you can generate flexibility. So what it needs to, I strongly believe, what needs to happen is we need to become more flexible, but it's together with manufacturing. The day will not come, I agree, I think, where you can build to order and the vehicle turns up in 24 hours. Well, that simply can't happen. But they use technology to update the vehicle in the garage, and that helps, obviously, to generate flexibility. And that's a concept that somebody needs to think through, and that might be the truth that companies like Google are better in seeing through this because they don't have no legacy. They don't have I won't mention the product, let's say F-150. They don't have an F-150 that has existed forever. They don't have, they can think disruptive because they've got no history. And that might help them. And the one thing we definitely can't control is a customer expectation. It will be whatever it will be. You think about Uber, you know. Uber, yes, they need vehicles, but Uber is just an app. That's low investment, high return. And somebody will use this sooner or later, and we need to respond to it. And it's not only logistics. I don't think you can fix it through logistics. You can't get apart from from China to the US, put it into a vehicle, and then ship it out to Canada in 24 hours. The day will not come. But the question is, which part should come out of China, right? The ones that don't matter. The one that is only the one color, but you can't have high complexity coming from long distance. I'm pretty convinced that's not the way it will end up, because you need to customize at the latest possible moment, and customization might be even including, you know, once the vehicles are built, like Tesla is doing. And that will be the expectation, and the next generation is clearly not interested in owning cars. Nobody, the young generation doesn't want to own a car, they want to use a car. That's the one thing that is for sure. And we need to be able to respond to it. And we need logistics to support it. Obviously, we are supporting a sales and manufacturing process. But we are key enablers, that's for sure.
Yeah. I think the whole conference, we talked a lot about change and how a lot of places are changing. And so if you think about automotive a little bit, to build on some of the comments before, there's a massive amount of change right now in the automotive industry, probably, and it'll continue to be exponential, most likely. So we're talking about this autonomous vehicles and all different things. And so I think that if you go back and compare it to what we were talking about, the technology and the other industries, probably we will emulate that in the next few years from an automotive point of view. So, but change is not a new thing in the automotive industry, right? So we all have lived with change. I mean, going through the 2009 crisis and all different things, that in itself was a change, was a disruptor, right? So I think that one of the main things that's going to happen is that, talking about consumers, you're going to have very different consumers as you move forward. Not only your existing markets, but there was a lot of conversation of the growth markets, right? So we're going to start growing in those markets. If you go back in the news and you read General Motors' announcements, we're putting a lot of bets still in China, still putting a lot of bets still in Brazil. We're putting a lot of, we're betting on Mexico side, I guess everybody else. So there's going to be a different type of growth as well, different markets. So I think we need to have a very flexible supply chain to absorb. Oh, that was quite a statement.
We seem to have been disrupted.
So, okay. So you see, I lost my train of thought now. So you need to have a very good supply chain and flexible enough to really try to cope with those changes. I tend to go back to the comments that we were talking before on the Amazon and everything. I honestly believe, and I had a conversation with one of a few of our suppliers actually, and I tend to believe, and by the way, I was not born and raised in the automotive sector, so you have to excuse me for that. But I tend to believe that there's a lot of good things and good practices in supply chains in other industries that we can reapply. So I'm not saying probably we can behave ever like an Amazon or any other company like that, because it's not that. And I tend to believe that a lot of these companies have used some of our existing principles. But I think now that if you see how the changes happened in all industries, how fast and quick of those happen, and if our market is going to change like that, probably we should reach out and talk to other industries and try to understand how do you cope with those changes, right? What do you do differently and apply to our complexities and to our industry? I think at least from a General Motors point of view, that's one of the things that we're going to focus a lot. We're going through a transformational initiative in our supply chain and logistics. And we're reaching across different tier ones, we're trying to see if we can collaborate with some other industries as well. I've worked in 5 different sectors before, and every single one of them in the past used to say, oh, I'm very unique. But when you start looking at different sectors, honestly, you can get very good, nice practices. And automotive will never be automotive anywhere, but I totally believe you can reapply. So I think that in order to be flexible, you have to do something like that and start looking at different places and encourage your suppliers to go with you, along with you, and set up the table so actually a true collaboration and innovation could happen.
And the 2 CEOs of the LSPs, where are you looking to anticipate change? And not necessarily for automotive, but it might be, what's going to be the future like? Driverless trucks, autonomous trucks, or cars, or whatever. What are you doing to prepare your company for these kind of monumental changes that could be coming soon?
So maybe I'll start first. So I think sometimes we forget, being in the US or in Western Europe, that, and we talk about driverless trucks and drones and advancements in the supply chain, but if you're in India, you actually just want a truck that goes from one state to the other and shows up reliably, right? And there's all sorts of reasons that is the way it is today. Or if you're a Chinese auto manufacturer and you're trying to penetrate Eastern Africa, you want to figure out how to cross a border, right? So from a UTI perspective, our disruption is trying to accelerate the growth of first world transportation services in places where our clients are trying to expand. I don't have a lot of clients that come to me and say, tell me how to cross between here and Canada, right? And people are looking for pennies here. There's dollars and millions of dollars on the ground in places like India, in places like Africa, because the infrastructure just doesn't work at all. So frankly, our target is to do well in the emerged markets, but to focus on taking emerged market solutions into emerging markets and helping them to get the truck to work, and then leaving the drone to Amazon.
Louis, our approach is really looking at it from a cost perspective. So we have $14 billion or so of costs every year. So we want to take out a few $100 million of those costs that are inefficient. We have duplicative functions going on, mainly in the back office, mainly in some purchasing activities, and dedicate a good chunk of that to R&D. Redistribute that money towards improvising, innovating, doing skunk works projects in the IT, and let them see what they can develop. And be very connected to customers and always asking you, what do you want? What is your dream? What is your ideal IT connectivity? And we generally hear the same things from different ones. They want speed. They want transparency of information. They want information in real time. They want much better track and trace. They want to do everything as cheaply as possible.
Yesterday, Brad said that in contrast to a competitor, you are afraid an app could put you out of business, or let's say undermine your business. First, I guess I'd ask Ed if you share that fear that the Uber of logistics, for example, could come along and really devastate or decimate something about the model as it is today, and what you might be preparing for something like that. Maybe build that up yourself.
That's an interesting question. I think that in the near term, no. In the 10-year time frame, perhaps. But I think we've been through numbers of cycles every decade about how Commerce One or some of these other things were going to change the world. And the challenge I see in our supply chains is each of the gentlemen on this stage has a different expectation about how they want to absorb data, right? And so for us or for GT Nexus or for someone in the middle, it creates a challenge because there's always a different standard and there's always a little bit different way of doing it, right? So information, I think, and passing data back and forth in the supply chain with our carrier partners, it has been a challenge, it continues to be a challenge, and we get better at it. I think that and our ingrained practices, which are subject to disruption, is what really prevents some of these great ideas from taking off, is that it's a data problem, right? And it's not that we don't have the software and not that we don't have the brilliant minds, it's how do we manage that data together and how do we create that flexibility? And the Skunks works to show something that'll work and really drive the efficiency. So the efficiencies are there, there just seem to be, in the time that I've been in the industry, it sits in front of you, but you can't harvest it. And I go back to, it's a data problem and a change management problem.
And a question, since we've got this panel of LSPs and car makers, and maybe I'll start off with Miguel on this, because he came from an LSP previously, and gone straight to the car maker, now in purchasing it. So you're now you're the bad guy. What have you learned from moving from the LSP to a car maker, and what advice would you give to the LSPs now that you've understood kind of both sides? What should they do? How should they develop to serve your industry better?
So, two things. I'm glad you raised the purchasing point, because I heard that purchasing was not mentioned enough. So, but definitely, it's a different role, that's a different function that General Motors is trying to do in logistics right now. What I would just say to the LSPs is that don't think life is a lot easier on the car maker side. So a lot of times when you are an LSP, you think, oh, I wish I could be on that side. So, they get to tell you what to do and all different things, and what do I get, right? So it's not that easy, trust me. It's just a lot of complications and everything. But on a more serious note, I believe that the relationship between LSPs and shippers, I'm just going to say shippers in general, right? So I went back and forth LSPs and shippers in my previous lives, and that's not the first time. But I think the most important thing is what I would just say is listen to your customer. There was one element that it was brought up a few minutes ago in terms of listen to a customer. Sometimes I think as an LSP, you're very eager to say what you can do, what your capabilities are, and all the different items. But sometimes that may or may not be useful for your customer. So I think it's very important you listen to your customer, be proactive, aggressively proactive on a number of things. And it's very good that you focus on operations. That's your bread and butter, right? Focus on operations. So if you want to bring innovation ideas and all different elements, focus on the basics first, right? So make sure your operations are running correctly. So then you can start listening to better, innovative ideas, right? So once that happens, I think it's up to us on the shipper side, which I honestly recognize, at least from my perspective, we don't do a good enough job to set the table to say, okay, let's have a proactive kind of a thought process of how we can reduce the total enterprise cost instead of focusing on rates. I'm coming from a purchasing guy, okay? So that's something we're trying to do right now in General Motors. We're trying to focus, as you hear a lot, on the waste elimination and efficiency. So not focus on, and we've been doing this for a long time, not focus only on just the regular bidding, the drop of the rate or something like that. We just want to reduce cost in total, cost in general. So going back to my first statement, listen to your customer when that happens, right? So if you want to sell something here, try to sell it from the other side as well in terms of, good listening skills. And last thing I would just say is that this is a relationship, always. I mean, it's a cliche, right? We talk about relationships. And this is really a true relationship. So I would encourage all LSPs to continue to be hungry all the time. Because I think you go in, you make the sale, and trust me, I've been on the other side, selling and operating, and it's a very gruesome process. Top executives here get to say, yeah, I approve this, or I don't approve this, and go tell your customer to do something else, right? It's a very complicated process, I acknowledge. But there's a lot of hunger. All the initiatives and all the corporation and all the focus is, I'm going to go out and get this customer, right? But once that happens, continue with that hunger. Because if you're with a customer for 2, 3, 4, 5 years, and you're not that hungry, you're only running like your little kind of a day-to-day work, then it's no longer valid. So talking about innovation, all different elements, back to my initial point, you don't set the table for that. So my only thing is continue to be hungry.
And to other car makers, what can the logistics companies do to help you?
I would say find the guy whose name is Uber and make him work for you, because I strongly believe the guy is out. We don't know his name, and this person will come and might blow us away. And disruption is will not only happen in the automotive industry, it has happened in other industries. And I would not be so sure that it will not happen in logistics. Actually, I'm convinced it will happen. And when this person knocks on your door, listen to him or her. Well, it has happened to other companies that didn't listen to it. As you might know, I think lots of people believe that Windows was invented by Microsoft. That is not true. Right? It was actually invented by Xerox. Unfortunately, they let the people go. They invented it because they didn't listen to them. I'm sure whoever's the CEO of Xerox these days would love to have Windows in his portfolio, and listen to the people that come up with creative ideas. take some risks, be innovative. It might not pay off, there will be failures, but I'm pretty confident somebody will be successful. If I knew what the idea is, I would not be sitting here, trust me. I would do something else, but I'm probably not smart enough to figure it out.
Dana, anything to add?
Yeah, I want to go back and highlight a couple of comments that came out of the session right before lunch. There were 2 comments made in there that one I think was missed, and Antonio from SIVA talked about his 6 items for success. And one of them was listening to the customer, just like we've been talking about. And I think he kind of slid in there, not on the slide, get the customer to listen to you. And I think that's really important. And I have to say thank you to all the panelists that did that panel right before lunch. I threw out maybe an unfair question, a loaded question, I think, as Antonio put it. Thank you for giving a very honest answer back to that. It was important to hear from all the LSPs sitting there saying, yeah, the OEMs don't necessarily embrace the change that we try to help initiate. So I really want to say, to the point that Antonio made, get your customers to listen to you. You mentioned about the requirements are different for every one of the customers. If you think about it, we're all basically doing a lot of the same things. If we don't listen to our service providers, our LSPs, when they come to us and say, from an outside observation, this might work for you, then shame on us.
Okay. Have you got anything to add to that, Marc, before we go to...
Yeah, I keep on thinking about the Uber disruption as we talk about this, and for some reason I have a picture of a guy in Long Beach, pulling all this stuff off a vessel, putting it in his basement, and sending it out via UPS. So I think that type of disruption in our industry is going to be a little ways away. But I agree with what everyone's saying. I mean, I really think that we're finally at the point of promise that transparency and data visibility and sharing information has. I mean, we've spent the last 30 years, using EDI, using XML, communicating electronically amongst our supply base. But I think we're finally at the point of promise where that data visibility and the richness of the data that we can collect, the ability to analyze big data, really puts us in a position to start driving waste out of the system. And the waste that I'd like to see driven out of the system is the duplicative waste. And, what you just mentioned is the things that the service providers and the LSP see every day, because they've got 6 or 7 of us going at them with our fantastic ideas on how we want to do things, and they're having to react 7 different ways. I think those days, that's the disruptor, I think, in the industry for us is how do we get rid of the duplicative waste, the things that we don't consider a competitive advantage for us individually as manufacturers, because we share this network. It's a shared asset network for all of us for the most part. So, I mean, that's the challenge, right? Is listening to the service providers in a manner that gives us that insight, sharing the insight that we have individually. But I do think it comes with sharing our insight collectively to identify some of those opportunities to remove that duplicative waste.
On the connected car for a moment, when you talk about being at the point of promise, I mean, it lends itself so naturally in some ways to communicating for tracking via telematics, or in a truck fleet with telematics. Sometimes legal requirements to have it. I mean, is that something that you're more actively looking at now, specifically for vehicle logistics, in terms of using the systems to communicate locations and diagnostics and things like that?
If you were 12 years ago or 13 years ago, if you would talk about telematics, you wouldn't be talking about connected car. You'd be talking about how the car communicates with the user and communicates externally. And it was funny because some of the challenges we had in telematics at the time, because on the logistics side, we would approach the engineers and say, this technology is something that we think we might be able to use, before it gets to a consumer. And the challenges at the time were the consumer didn't want that invasion of privacy. And if you look at, you talked about the introduction of the smartphone in the last 8 years and how the consumer's reaction to privacy has changed. Well, connected car. I think the issues with privacy and concerns about having a car that can connect to just about anything externally, that's dissipating extremely quickly to the point where I think there's an expectation of the ability to share information between these connected cars. So I'm not sure that hypothesis is that far off. I'm not sure that that the engineering in the connected cars won't have some sort of application in the supply chain, specifically on the finished vehicle side. So I'm not sure that that's not a disruptor moving forward, at least when it comes to tracking and tracing. So.
And we've heard what you can do for the car makers, but the other side of that, one of the comments that you said was make sure they listen to you as well. So firstly, if you want to respond to what they said about what their expectations are for our LSPs, but also what can they do to help you to help them?
So I've had a lot of customers in not just the auto industry, but a lot of different industries, and over a long period of time. I've never been able to get that to work. I've never been able to get to a situation where it's a true partnership. I mean, it sounds great, and it's a great idea. I've never seen it in reality where it's an equal partnership, where the customer who's wiring money from their account to our account is as interested in what I think they should be purchasing as what they know, because they know more, they have their whole organization, they have pressure on them, they've already figured it out mostly, you can do some fine tuning. Once in a while, you come up with some really good big idea that they take credit for and then go tell them, championing the organization, you make a great friend there, but by and large, I find, particularly on the transportation side of the house, I wouldn't say it's commoditized, because it's not. There's on-time performance, and there's dispute resolution, and there's technology communication that you can differentiate yourself to some extent. But at the end of the day, every purchase of transportation in auto and the other ones, they talk about service, and you want service, but it comes down to price. So you have to take cost out of this system and deliver a fantastic price with fantastic service. And if you can do that, that's great. So I've almost given up trying to get my customers listening to me. I'd much rather focus more on me listening to them and then figuring out a way to provide that cheaper.
No, I can't believe anyone else would agree with that. Surely not. Ed, have you got anything?
Oh, I love this topic. So the words EBID and innovation, I don't think go in the same sentence, right? So, and I'm going to be a little controversial. I think that procurement is the single worst enemy of collaboration that exists in the industry. Because a procurement person's job, and it's an important function in all companies, is to create an apples-to-apples comparison, because that's the easiest way for them to run a bid of 600 lanes or 30 lanes or whatever we're doing. And when you're going to go evaluate those bids and do that fairly and ethically and honestly, then you don't want the provider to come back and say, well, what if we change the pickup time? What if you change the cutoff time from 4 o'clock to 6 o'clock? I can actually save you 10 cents a kilo. Well, no, you can't do that, because I'd have to go back and tell everyone that that was open to everyone. We have to be fair. So no, just bid it the way I told it. And if you get outside of my spreadsheet or my eBid tool, then you're done and get out, right? And I'm being a little extreme here, right? But I think the port strike and the fact that transportation prices are rising has caused a number of players this year to say, well, let's talk about this differently. Let's talk about a couple lanes for a couple partners. And I agree with your definition of partner here. I'm the provider, but someone might call it a partnership. And let's say, how can we do better on this lane? And then listen to the LSP and let us say, well, if you did this or that, or then here's an opportunity. So do that with a couple players on a lane instead of an eBid, and then I think you unlock some potential. Or get 3 people to have the same invoice format, right? Generally, everybody wants the same thing, but if you want to know why the LSPs don't invoice accurately all the time, it's because there are 55 different invoice formats, and it's difficult for our people and our systems to follow all those. So I think there's a great opportunity there. Still keep the rigor and the discipline that a procurement function needs to have in the organization, but match that with an open opportunity for innovation. That would be very positive disruption that would get the OEMs or our clients and the LSPs opportunity to help each other. And so we just need to create that forum around price but around letting us come up with a better way to build a better mousetrap around that.
And before we go back to the LSPs, the car makers, perhaps to give them a chance to respond, I do, I'm very fortunate I get to meet lots of car makers globally, and I got some responses and collected them as why perhaps some of the good ideas, new ideas, aren't accepted by car makers. And this isn't from LSPs, this is from car makers. It's hard to convince the management. Nobody wants to be first. Is it long-term tested? We're talking about new ideas. Is it long-term tested? Who else is using it? What's the cost saving? Surprisingly, that's a question. When will we save the money? Does it break even at least within the 1 year? If the answer is no, or if there's small savings, the risk is too high. Will it reduce, transportation costs? Start-up companies are not trusted. So if Uber did knock on our door, we'd probably say no anyway. Do they have a strong financial background? Changing existing systems is complicated. Even if someone has a much better concept, we'll not be able to change. And the killer phrase is, who will guarantee this? So these are some things from car makers, why they think, because quite often, sometimes it's beyond our responsibility or our level. Sometimes you guys, yourselves or whoever it is, might be willing to accept change. But these are the things that car makers themselves tell me hinder new ideas and change. So, that's just listen, no comment from my side. But is there anything you'd like to respond to the LSPs? Because you know me, I don't like to start trouble, but I just thought I'd throw that out there.
Disruptions cost millions of dollars, so we are risk averse. When we get a solution that works, that allows us to maintain a certain level of quality and a certain level of deliverable quality, we tend to stay within those parameters until we organically get to some form of evolution around that. It's an expensive proposition to make significant change. I don't think as an industry we're without change. I think again, some of the things that we've done together over the last 30 years have set the benchmark on global supply chains, certainly. So I think there's innovation there. On the issue around cost, sourcing is an important component of everything we do because of the high fixed costs that the OEMs maintain. The other, and I know on the LSP side how difficult it is, and on the carrier side how difficult it is because you've got your own capital structures to deal with, and you're multi-customer, multi-industry. So you're right. It's never a two-way street because we each have our own individual capital structures and considerations to take care of. But I think we work extremely well as an industry, pulling together the solutions that are required. And certainly getting through some of the exceptions. At the end of the day, every OEM has been in a situation where they've sourced something that may have appeared risky, but that may have had a high reward. And you don't want to be 6 months into a program that's supposed to last 3 years and realize that you're failing considerably and having to go out and do it again. So, but I think maybe I'm an eternal optimist. I just think that as an industry, I've been in it for 20 years, and the evolution, it hasn't been a revolution, as you said. It hasn't been a bloody revolution. It's been a fantastic evolution, of visibility, of velocity, of partnership. I think after having seen a whole bunch of other retail and commercial supply chains in the last 5 years, everybody here does a very, very good job. So. Not to say that we're not going to continue to evolve, because frankly, I think that's in everyone in this room, in this industry's DNA. I think when we talk about LSPs and new parties coming into this business, the challenge they have is they need to realize that continuous improvement and continuous innovation is part of the DNA of the industry. So if you don't bring that to the table, it makes it very difficult for you to gain any traction. But those that do, even new entrants, those that do and can prove that, I think are wildly successful. So.
Yeah, I think, excuse me, life is interesting. I used to think procurement was evil too. So now I hold that title. So, but it is a very complicated, but yet I think we can simplify that element. I do believe there's been some good signs of collaboration in this environment. I think the West Coast was mentioned, right? I believe that probably everybody sitting here was affected by it, and probably we definitely needed our logistics providers' help to go through everything we went through. So I think there's some good signs of collaboration happening right now. I do agree, and I like the analogy that probably purchasing or procurement and EBITDA, I think that was the analogy that Dad mentioned. It cannot go on the same page. But I think in a way it can. So one of the things that goes back to leadership and the management's direction, right? So in our case, for example, my reward system right now is not about only saving money. Our reward system, all of our group, is about saving cost and going to and achieving the budget. That's it. If I happen to increase rates, but I still achieve the budget, then I'll get a bonus. So I think it's a good thing, right? Because, and all of our group, operations, planning, purchasing, and all of our group are exactly measured the same. So this is something different that we're trying to do to set the stage so we can start, going through more of a collaboration environment. 12 months ago, more or less, we had a large conference and where we invited a number of providers, and we launched our intercontinental strategy. So that was the first we revamped our strategy, and we're doing that for the next 2 or 3 years as well. And one of the topics we brought to the table was help us here and with ideas on how can you increase profits or EBITDA while we reduce cost. What are those ideas, right? So, and we're still looking for some of those opportunities. And to tell the truth, I can tell you we had 3 of them last year that have provided extremely good cost savings. And it was just similar to what you mentioned, right? We were talking about it. The supplier came back. They drew a picture. We liked it, went back, got into it, and got a very good, significant amount of savings. So I think it's possible. It's not easy. And we have to work as an OEM to set the table, set the stage, to make that happen. So I told yesterday one of our suppliers here, and probably, I don't know if she's here or not, but I said one of the problem mistakes us as OEMs make is that we tend to tell our logistics suppliers what to do, right? But you're the experts. So I was telling them, don't get GMized, right? Just try to go outside. Let us go outside of your team. Let us understand the great capabilities you have behind that curtain of your team that's working with us, so we can improve on some other things. So there's, I think, a lot of opportunities from both ends. But we have to start by setting up the stage, setting up the contractual terms, and setting up the capabilities to help our LSPs help us as well.
I thought maybe we'd see if anyone in the audience had a question, since we're kind of dominating up here. Do we have any questions? No? You're all getting tired? I wanted to ask a question first to the OEMs. I mean, we have a logistics provider on stage which has recently grown. I'm not asking you to come on XPO, but XPO has obviously acquired and is becoming much bigger. How important to you is scale in your logistics providers? Do you want to see big, powerful providers, or are you looking for more consolidation, or is that less of an issue when you're making your decisions on providers?
That's a really good question. Yeah, obviously, we need to work with people that have got a certain size. I think that we can't have a business where we produce millions and millions of cars, and we work with people that are very small companies. And I know from experience, I think somebody came to me, he wanted to have business, and I asked him, what is the size of your company? And he said, well, I've got 2 trucks. I said, you really don't want to work with us, because if you fail once, I think your business, you might be out of business, and we might have an issue. So you need to have a certain size if you want to play in the automotive industry. There's no doubt. Having this said, and that's also experience. People that are more creative tend to be smaller companies rather than the bigger companies, because they have got sometimes the more innovative ideas. So you need to find the right balance. It needs to be a certain size. Do we want to have more bigger companies? I don't think so. That's really in the interest of the automotive industry. I'm sure others want to grow. I understand this, but competition is healthy. And if the companies get too big, you're pretty soon in a monopoly market, and you don't want to be there either, because that will stop any evolution. So I know what I'm talking about. As some people might know, I'm coming from Germany, and there's quite some big logistics companies which are German-based. I think 2 of the biggest companies globally are German-based. So there's a certain size that is healthy, but it should not grow beyond a certain level.
I guess for me, it depends on what you're trying to solve. The right tool, the right hammer for the right nail, right? And from our standpoint, you do need scale, you do need scope, but the bottom line is execution, cost, and quality. And it's different when we're talking about parts and materials, and we're talking about service parts and finished vehicles. Regional solutions, or things that lend themselves to regional solutions. Finished vehicles is a perfect example. You can get a really small company with 2 trailers servicing somewhere, at a certain area that does fantastic work. And, over the course of a decade, you could see them grow, to multiple locations, multiple trailers, or you can see them stay exactly where they are and stay within the portfolio because, they satisfy that. So I think it's really comes down to the, where you need the scale globally or interregionally, what the scope of the operation is, and, whether, they can execute at the right cost, providing the right quality. But I think there's always room, but I think the glide path to kind of get into this business, as I mentioned earlier, is there's a lot of show me and prove me first. And if you've got the wherewithal and you've got the stick-to-itiveness as a smaller operator, certainly on the finished vehicle side, geographically within either the United States or I imagine geographically within EMEA or anywhere else, you've got as good an option as anybody else, or as good an opportunity as anybody else to kind of carve out a niche somewhere. But
yeah, I would say from my perspective, being a big company is not really the driver. Being a company that's horizontally integrated across regions, across modes, across services, can be pretty important. Because then you've got the capability of being able to blend services that are very complementary to each other.
The thing from my perspective, the 4 of us are very large companies, and definitely all of us looking to leverage scale. That's our main objective, right? But to some comments before, if a large company help you to leverage that scale, help you to go into those growing markets to tailor specific solutions in Brazil, in India, in China, in Mexico, then yeah, absolutely, you're looking for a large company. If that company is not helping you because it just doesn't move, it's not nimble enough because of their internal kind of management system, if you will, then probably that's not a good company to work with from a leverage scale. It becomes a little bit slow from our perspective. So it's always a balance. I think there's the right answer in my view.
Ed, where do you see UTI in this picture? I mean, it's perhaps more medium-sized. I mean, do you see you have a different sort of niche to serve in that sense rather than maybe one of the largest players?
Yeah, I think in the forwarding side, there's a certain critical mass you need to be a global player and to have the infrastructure, and we think we're there, and we have about 187 branches around the world, so you need that global network, or you have to deal with agents, and a lot of the larger companies don't like it when you have an agent network, so you need that foundation. But the rest of the CL&D, what we call CL&D business, so the 3PL, the warehousing and trucking, is a very local business. So if you're trying as an OEM or anyone else to find a good provider, you really have to go country by country, or in some cases you need to go geography by geography, right? So if you have a plant, and there aren't too many of them in California, using an example, and you need inbound to plant in Fremont, There are a lot of people that are really good at that there, but if you're going to go hire people in California, that's a whole different hiring market. You really need to understand that market, and that's different than Kentucky. It's different than Tennessee and Alabama. So I would argue that, and that's how we approach our CL&D business, is looking at that by local markets and saying, here's where we're going to stand and be very strong and be one of the top 3 players. India would be an example, or South Africa in our company. But you know, in Kentucky and Tennessee, there's plenty of good players there. We're not going to jump in and try to be number 15 in an already crowded race.
So we're doing a couple $2 billion of revenue between these 4 companies, so we must be doing something right. And I think it's partly because we have leadership positions in certain areas, like premium freight here in the United States, and the technology we have is unique. We've invested a lot of money into it. And I think on the intermodal side, the 11,000 boxes we have is better than someone who has 2 boxes, and therefore we get the business. And I think on the truck brokerage side, the fact that we are the 2nd biggest really does make a big difference. And the fact that in Europe we have we have over €1 billion of truck brokerage, and we've got 7,700 trucks, it really distinguishes us, and that's why the auto companies do business with us. But at the end of the day, that's the ticket of admission. That gets you in the game, having the capability. I have a huge amount of respect for the purchasing departments because that's their job. Their job is to beat us up. That's their job. Their job is to try to squeeze us, to try to give the illusion that there's an alternative even when we're the only alternative, to try to, put stress in us, to try to convince us that even though we've been running this contract for 10 years, they're going to put it out to RFP, and there's someone else who's magically going to come in and replace all the technology and do it for cheaper. And they're good at it. They're very, very good at it. And they get us to start thinking, well, maybe she's telling the truth. Maybe we are going to lose this business if we don't lower the price after all our costs have gone up over these years and we haven't raised the price. So I'm in awe of purchasing departments. It's amazing, actually. It's just very, very impressive. $4 billion ladies right there. So very good job, very good job. It's price. It's price in the end. That's my opinion.
But kind of talking about size of suppliers, and there are larger logistics providers. We kind of started the question based on XPO, but in the scheme of things, there's bigger logistics companies than XPO. But there are, in the parts world, there's super suppliers, and they've become more powerful. They're stronger financially. But that's actually made it good for the automotive industry. Maybe they are the ones who are coming up with the technology and the new ideas and the powertrains and so on to move the industry forward. So is there a value in having the other side of that, of having super logistics providers? Could you outsource more? We talk about being proactive and technology, and admittedly small players can be more flexible, but the real big new ideas need investment. So maybe we're getting to the stage where we need super suppliers and outsourcing logistics more. I know I'm asking kind of the turkeys to vote for Christmas, but would it be a good idea to outsource the whole of logistics to other companies? General Motors have tried it and taken it back, and they're not doing it again in Europe. But Ford have done something kind of similar in Europe. So is it time for the super LSPs to be more involved and to outsource logistics more and, to a much greater level than it already is? Matt, because you've kind of you've done a bit.
Direct answer, no. Yeah. I'm a strong believer of you can outsource an awful lot of things. You should not outsource your brains. That's not a good idea. And clearly, I think the logistics process is a key enabler for our manufacturing process. And I personally strongly believe you need to keep in control what's happening, because it's driving our plants ultimately that produce, depending on takt time, 1 or 2 vehicles every minute. And ultimately, we're not making money by being very efficient in logistics. We're making money by selling cars. And if we stop this process and give it to super logistics providers, I don't think it can work, because the one thing that, with all due respect to these companies, they will never understand what our production intent is. right? And our production intent ultimately drives our logistics. And it's difficult to see how they can get the insight to the level that they can execute this to perfection. I think they would never be onto the inner track of what the next plans are, what the next generation of product looks like, you know, what you're planning in the future. You can't share this with a logistics provider, and that drives lots of our decisions around logistics. So the core of the process, I strongly believe, needs to be done by the OEMs themselves. There are elements that obviously you can build on the expertise. We are not logisticians. I think we are a manufacturing company, an engineering company. That's a core competence of all of our OEMs, but we need to keep in control. Therefore, to give okay, I could then retire, that's good for me, but it's maybe not so good for a motor company.
But isn't that what the interiors guy said? You can't outsource all the seating to Lear. And the electronics guy said you can't outsource so much electronics to Bosch. But in the end, that has possibly, and I'm not an expert on interiors, but has the fact that you have outsourced more to the Lears and the Bosches and John's Controls and whoever actually give an extra value. You might have lost some of the power, some of the knowledge, but you've outsourced that knowledge to the people who perhaps know more about it.
Let's take these analogies, and if you're in the engineering world, I've not heard about too many OEMs that have outsourced their cycle plan, right? I think the cycle plan is still running by the OEMs, which basically defines the product of the future. Which product do you want to build? Which features do you want to build? That's a bit, certainly that has not been outsourced. And the day we'll outsource this, I think we become just manufacturers, which I don't think any of us has got this as a future business opportunity. So it's a bit like keeping control of your cycle plan. Which products do you want to build? How do you want to build it? Which features? And that, I strongly believe, will stay with the OEMs. And the same applies to logistics, I think. We need to understand what's happening, what is doable, what is not doable, because it ultimately drives our manufacturing process, you know. You can't build vehicles without parts, that's for sure.
But then again, I outsourced my brains to Chris about 7 or 8 years ago. But I did keep the good looks.
Do we have any questions from the audience? You guys have been very quiet, particularly quiet this time. Anybody awake yet? That's resounding no. Lou, do you have another question on that?
Yeah, perhaps what do you think will have, what would be the most important part? You know, the odds are you won't be in your role in a few years' time. You'll have progressed and, you know, maybe, you know, chairman of General Motors or Ford or Honda or whatever it is. But what do you think will be the most important part of your role in 3 to 5 years? If you're in procurement now, what do you think the most important part of being head of logistics procurement as a car maker would be in a few years' time? If you're head of MP&L or production or vehicle logistics, how do you think that role might change in a relatively near future, 3 or 4 years?
So I think that a lot of comments were made again during the conference in terms of our future trends, and most definitely probably is to adapt to the supply chain and logistics to those future trends. For example, again, going back to the growth markets, where can we start building capability from a supplier-based point of view to make sure that we meet our demands in the future? So there was a lot of conversation about growth in Mexico, right? We saw a bicycle, I think, for India, right? So, and I think that talks to its point. Every country has its specific capability and growth needs. So I guess a lot of my role, given the global nature of it, is going to be develop in every single region the capabilities to kind of help General Motors to get to their final objectives. So, another thing is that by doing so, there's as I mentioned before, we're embarking into a transformational initiative and logistics, where obviously that is going to take a lot of our time as well. So we're going to do that. We have a time frame of the next 2 to 3 years, And part of that transformational component that goes back to the comments before that were made before in terms of how can we start making logistics purchasing being an enabler for growth and being an enabler for collaboration and waste elimination and total enterprise focus, so we can, again, help collaborating with our key logistics suppliers, but also contribute to our business goals. And the last thing, and probably we haven't talked a lot about that, we did mention a few things about organizational development and talent. So the next 5 years, I think, is going to be extremely critical in terms of talent. So here in the US, obviously, we have our challenges, and in the growth markets, we have our challenges as well. So I think that the focus on talent is going to be extremely delicate, at least from our perspective.
Yeah, I would agree with that last comment about managing talent. As our, at least inside our organization, as our current management team ages, myself included. No. Yeah, I'm in that same range as you are, about 40, so I got a few years left. But as our current management team and our current team ages, we've got to continue to develop that bench strength, the next generation. But even whether I stay in the role that I'm in today or I move into a procurement role, I think it's very important to understand that you still have to be a change agent. You know, there was a comment made before lunch about most organizations look at change as being risk, but really the way we should be looking at change is not changing is risky because of the constant churn, the evolution that Brad showed in his presentation yesterday. A lot of that was centered around technology. But the technology is changing our environment. The buyers are changing our environment. So really, regardless of the area, we need to continue to be the change agents inside of our organizations.
Mark, how will vehicle logistics, what will your role in vehicle logistics be like?
Yeah, I think in 4 or 5 years, I think, you know, for me personally, it's going to be how do you leverage the promise of visibility and transparency to reduce the duplicative costs in the network. I think, you know, all of us invest in certain things in a silo, and you know, with the ability to analyze big data really, really quickly, you know, being able to communicate more effectively in maybe open source platforms that allow us to share information more effectively. You know, we need to get to a point where we identify the things. It's no different than your outsourcing comment, right? You know, traditionally you want to outsource the tactical and you want to retain the strategic. You want to know what you're buying all the time. You want to have source purchasing people that know how to buy the things that we have to consume. You know, well, it's no different with identifying, you know, what's a competitive advantage in our industry and what's not a competitive advantage. And if we look at the transportation network, you know, arguably there may be some parts and materials or inbound services that are specific to each one of our capital structures or plant locations. But certainly on the outbound vehicle side, as I've said it before, there's, you know, we shouldn't be considering it a competitive advantage individually. We should be looking at how we drive cost out and how we work collectively with the carrier base to improve everybody's productivity, you know, improve everybody's margins. And that's what I'm hoping for over the next 5 years. I'm hoping 5 years from now we're sitting here talking about some of the success stories around, you know, getting rid of 7 or 8 different types of invoicing. You know, it comes down to even the basic administration of the accounts, right? I mean, those are the types of things that, you know, shouldn't be a barrier to productivity. So.
Okay, I think also that the biggest change will be in vehicle logistics in the next coming years. Just think about it also from a customer perspective. For most customers, buying a car is their biggest or second biggest investment in their life, depending whether they buy themselves a home or not. And we don't tell them where their car is. The reason why we don't tell them, there's lots of reasons. One of the biggest reasons is we don't know either. To I know I'm exaggerating the situation, but there's a little bit of truth in there. I think we know to the last level of detail where every part is, but the way how we track and trace vehicles is somehow limited. We don't collaborate in this business, although we've got one thing that is common, which is the equipment, which is much more unique, obviously, to automotive than anything else. And we simply don't have this track and trace, you know. My daughter recently arrived here in Detroit, and I could track and trace her on the flight in because I was interested when she arrives. And I could see her passing by Iceland and all the good stuff in real time, but where on earth is my vehicle? You know? That's reality right now, and I agree, in 5 years' time, this will be over. We will be able to do this. And we will, instead of working very sequential in this process, it will be real time, it will be in parallel. These things will change. And there will be much more collaboration between the OEMs because it's unavoidable. Because that's the only way you can drive out cost. You know, if you've got a truck, I think the rattling chains is what costs you money, right? When it comes back empty. Yep. And the empty running in vehicle logistics is 10 times higher than it is in material logistics, because obviously you can share the truck for something else. And that's where I think the biggest change will happen, and it will be disruptive for us because we're not used to it. We're simply not used to it.
And what will the role of a CEO of a logistics company be like in 4 or 5 years' time? How will it change?
I think it'll still, well, if we have a common invoicing format, my life will be a lot easier. My cash flow will be better. I think hopefully forums like this create the opportunity for us to really move things forward, right? And to say, well, how can we, like on the vehicle information side, if it's cost per mile and there's no premium for information, it won't go anywhere. We'll still be having the same discussion in 5 years. If it's cost per mile plus 5 cents a mile for the best visibility, suddenly someone sees an economic incentive that our organizations will then respond to, and they will provide that information, right? We on the air freight side had the same challenges. Like Lufthansa put a huge amount of investment into cargo tracking, did the flight leave 10, 15 years ago, but all of us in the industry still penalized them and said, well, we're not going to pay an extra 3 cents a kilo for that from Detroit to Frankfurt. We're going to use whoever's cheapest. And so eventually their CEO says, well, their cargo CEO says, well, that's not worth the investment because the industry doesn't care. The industry cares, we just don't know how to pay for it. And I think, so when we get to that point where we can figure out how to put those into the structures and pay for it, I think our lives will be easier and we'll be able to drive more innovation. So.
I see my job very in simple terms. How do we provide the services that the customers want at the cheapest possible price with the highest possible quality? And if we can just chip away at our cost structure, make sure we're very lean, have very little inefficiency, very little waste. I don't think zero inefficiency, zero waste is a realistic goal in life, but as little inefficiency and as little waste as possible, and we can pass along a good chunk of that cost savings to the customer while at the same time doing what they want in terms of intermodal, doing what they want in terms of the premium freight, doing what they want in terms of the truck transportation, making sure everything's on time at least 98, 99% of the time. 100% is not attainable, but very, very close to that. Making sure the invoicing is accurate, making sure the EDI is working, making sure the ITs are cutting edge, and then we'll do well. I'll get to keep my job.
But what if the customer wants faster horses? To use the Henry Ford story.
I don't know that story. What do you mean?
No, he said, what if you asked the customer what they wanted, they would, instead of making cars, they would have said, we want faster horses. So are we going to just say, okay, the car makers just want faster horses, so we'll make faster horses? How do we convince them that there is better stuff out there? How do you convince these customers?
I really don't think it's the vendor's role to tell the customers what they need. They know what they need really well. They have a lot of smart people in the organization who spend a lot of time, who are well compensated, figuring out precisely what they're trying to do. Our job is to listen to them. If we can add to the conversation in some way, that can add some value to that, and once in a while we do, that's great. And that strengthens the relationship. But I look at us, if they want faster horses, we're going to go get a bunch of horses, and real fast ones. Whatever the customer wants, we're going to give that to them.
But I think that's the innovation. So the customer says faster horses, and then our job is to turn that into, okay, what you're really saying is you want this thing called a car, and I'm going to make it for you. And I think that's where the skunks works, that's where the innovation comes, is we listen to the clients, we hear these issues that are being brought up, and we say, we think this is what you're looking for, and then have the courage to stick through it for 2 or 3 years to see, well, I don't want to be first, I want it guaranteed. Someone will try it, it's a big industry. Someone will try it. If it's a good idea, it's going to succeed. And the person that has the good idea and takes the risk on our side will then get the rewards going forward. And it's not going to look exactly like what people expected. So I think that's the fun part of the job, is saying, where is that going to be, what geography, what type of service. That's what gets me up in the morning, honestly, is not just running the company, but figuring out what is the next car and trying to figure out how to provide that to the company.
But won't the answer be, well, this car thing's a great idea. Thanks for bringing it to us, Ed. Right, who can do that cheaper?
But if you have the car first, you win. So you have to be first. So I was at a client in an interesting country that you probably don't want to travel to right now. And the client said, look, we're trying to do this. And I talked to my guys, my company guy sitting next to me. I said, do you know what they're asking for? And he had, I have no idea. Well, they were asking for something that didn't exist in that market, but exists here in spades. So if I build that service in that country now and do that for the next 5 years, I own the market. Now, 5 years from now, I might want to sell that company to Brad. But realistically speaking, you could set up these things and create these opportunities, and there won't be competition for a couple of years. Yeah, everyone figures it out. NLM's a great example. NLM was a brilliant idea. There was no competition initially because it was a great concept, and then competition evolved. But I think NLM had a leading advantage for a number of years because no one else could offer that solution.
I think first mover advantage is a real thing, and I think you learn what the customer really wants, so you're designing something in response to what the customer's evolving needs are. But again, it comes down to price. You got to figure out a way to do that cheap. Otherwise, they won't do it.
Maybe just the last question from my side. If we're talking about the 4 or 5 year horizon, I mean, maybe specific to XPO, obviously you've made a lot of moves in North America and Europe recently. Do you see, in that time period or others moving to other parts of the world, India, China, obviously where we know, or we expect, especially in automotive, more growth to come than perhaps in North America and Europe?
Well, we're in India, we're in China, once we close the Conway acquisition, we're in 32 countries. But the bulk of our business is in Western Europe and in North America. And this is where there's healthy economies, there's large amounts of demand for both transportation and contract logistics, and they're easier countries to do business in with less risk. And that's what we're trying to accomplish.
So perhaps it's time to wrap up. We've already overrun now, but when you've got a panel like this, I think it's a shame to not take the opportunity to hear their thoughts. So I'd like to thank the panel firstly. Thank you very much for a great final session. I just wanted to thank you all for being a part of what seems to have been a great conference. We've had very interesting sessions, great presentations, great speakers and panelists. I think the interaction has been good, apart from this final session with no questions. But I hope you've enjoyed the discussions, and more importantly, or very importantly, take away what we've discussed. Don't go back to your offices on Monday and completely forget all the things all the promises you made yourself, that you were going to act on the things that you've heard the last couple of days. Make a note of them, act on them, put these ideas forward, remember what we've discussed, and take them forward. I hope we planned the session and the program this year to be more about thinking, thinking ahead and trying to change the industry a little bit. So I hope you're taking away something like that. I think we're collecting the evaluation forms, so I don't know if they've been collected yet, so we can make the prize draws. But while I do the wrap up, if you haven't completed the evaluation forms, do so now. Maybe, wave it in the air or whatever you do with it. Turn it into an aeroplane and throw it at me or something. And because we do take these seriously, and this way we can put you in the draw for it. And it might sound like just a box of cookies, but these are the Queen's favourite cookies. So I'd like to take this opportunity to thank our sponsors too. Our premier sponsors, Ryder, who I've said before have been our sponsors since the very first conference back in Chicago in the year 2000. Our global sponsors, CHEP, CTM, and Wallenius Wilhelmsen Logistics. Our gold sponsors, Air Charter Authority, Air Charter Service, APL Vascos, SIVA, DSV, ICL, Jack Cooper, JDA, Landstar, Montoy Auto Transport, Penske, ProTrans, Serger, UPDS, and XPO Logistics. And our silver sponsors, who you met over the last 2 days, and you'll see them in the program, and we've got them, the signage around, but as we're running short of time. But I hope you visited them, met their representatives, and if you didn't have a chance, you'll see them on our website, so please go on their websites to see why they sponsored and what they have to offer our industry. I think I mentioned earlier that it was my 33rd anniversary this morning that I unfortunately forgot. But as long as you'll support me on this, that the industry made a great effort thought that we were so special that you made individual presents for my anniversary, that we've got a mobile phone charger that was given to us as a present by Ryder. And then we've got coffee holders that were given to us by UPDS, and pens from everybody in the exhibition hall. So thank you all for giving us those individual special presents for our 33rd wedding anniversary. The next conferences that we've got lined up, it's a global industry, so I'm just trying to think, I don't even know, what month is it and where are we today? So it's September, and we're in Detroit for the global conference. October is our European Finished Vehicle Logistics conference that we do on behalf of the ECG, European Vehicle Logistics Association. November is Automotive Logistics South America in Brazil. December is Automotive Logistics India, which is in Delhi. January is Automotive Logistics Mexico, back in Mexico City. It's our second event out there, and the first was a fantastic event, and this year looks like it's going to be even better. March is Automotive Logistics Europe in Germany. April is Automotive Logistics China in Beijing. That's in April. May is, probably around May, will be our Finished Vehicle Logistics Conference in California. June is Automotive Logistics Russia, for those of you who want to come out there. Great time to invest in Russia. And then we start getting back to America with Import, Export, and Automotive Logistics Global, which I'm pretty certain will be back in September 2016 here in the home of the global automotive industry back in Detroit. So I hope you enjoyed the conference, and we'll see many of you around the world. Are we going to do, or has there been a draw for the Queen's cookies? I want to make sure I read this correctly. Are we raffling the Queen's cookies or the Queen's corgis? It wasn't, the spelling was quite bad, so I couldn't see. I'd like to invite my beautiful assistant so we can do the draw, but unfortunately we got Nimish instead. Nimish, as many of you might have seen, works with me on the conference program, so you'll be hearing more and getting calls from Nimish as we're putting our conferences together. So again, I outsourced most of my brains to Chris, but I'm now sharing the small bits that I had left to Nimish. So. Right, and the winner, I just want to make sure they said good things about us. It's from Geodis Bjorn, it would be a Scandinavian name, of course. Bjorn Srodke Bjorn. Yes. A beautiful Harrods box of biscuits with some cheap biscuits that we bought separately inside it. So, yeah. Thank you very much. Well, thank you, everybody. Thanks for all the car makers who committed to the conference. I think we had pretty close to 250 car makers and tier ones who registered, over 500 people, close to 600 people who registered and attended the conference over the 2 days. I hope you found it useful, valuable, beneficial, and then we'll see you again somewhere around the world. But thank you very much, everybody.